think we'll get started only as it's people can join us as we go.
Yes, yes.
But anyway, thank you all for joining us. It's lovely to see you all.
Yes, thank you.
I'm Heather from RedDoor, proud publisher of Richard and his latest novel, 3 Seasons of Sadie. I'll be chatting to Richard in a little bit. Just a bit of Zoom housekeeping for now. You'll see we've muted you all just to keep the videos nice and steady. If you want to see the speakers only, so myself and Richard for now, if you click on the 3 dots on the right hand side of your tile and show speaker view, that should pin us both and make it a little less crazy. So in a minute, Richard will get us started with a reading from the book. I've got some questions for Richard lined up, but if you've got some questions, please do pose them on the web chat. If you go to the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little chat icon, and if you click on it, it'll open it up on the right hand side. Pop your question in and I'll read it out later.
Okay.
And I'm sure we'll get.
And perhaps we can do some as we go, Heather.
Yeah,
I mean, if they're relevant to what we're saying, because
absolutely.
It's nice to have a sort of dialogue going. Absolutely. And this is for you, as you've been kind enough to tune in. This is for you really, rather than us. Yeah. But we hope it'll encourage you. Yeah.
So 3 Seasons of Sadie is the final playful episode in Richard's quintet of Sussex novels, The White Cross, Brimstone, Painted Lady and Chalkhill Blue. Between them, the novels span more than 800 years of English history, following the fortunes of 2 local families from their homeland in the Sussex Downs to far-flung locations across the world. So Richard, it's lovely to see you and congratulations.
Thank you.
Look what looks wonderful, and I really do love the cover. I think it's fantastic. So to get us started and to get us in the mood, would you do a reading for us, please?
Right. Well, I've chosen to do a reading which is, in effect, it's the meeting of the 2 characters who are the drivers of the novel. So one of them is a very callow youth who wasn't a million miles away from myself at that age. He's 19, he's joined a repertory company, he's very naive, he's very keen to lose his virginity, which also drives the plot and takes a while. But the other character is a very mature actress, and she's based on a real person who no one younger than me, and Heather certainly had never heard of her, was Evelyn Leigh, who was a musical comedy star, a singer, very glamorous lady, reached her height of fame, I think, probably in the 1920s and 1930s, was made famous in a Noel Coward musical called Bittersweet. I saw her when I was a little boy. I was taken to the pantomime, and I saw her with very long, beautiful legs, good singing voice, wearing fishnet tights, and playing the principal boy, Dick Whittington, but not looking very like a prospective Lord Mayor of London, I have to say. The next time I saw her was when I joined the theatre, and the bit I'm going to read out is actually that event. And it was when I joined the theatre, her husband was in a play, and she came to see him. He was called Frank Lawton, and again, no one will remember Frank Lawton, but he was in the original Hollywood film of David Copperfield, and he was David Copperfield. So another name that's gone, but he was her husband at the time, not the first, and she'd come to see him. So this description is really very much me seeing Evelyn Leigh as an older lady. Glasses have to go on. I walked down to the theatre to see the set erected for the 3 Seasons, as everyone was calling the sequence of one-act plays Miss Compton had selected for her comeback. Only the greatest comeback since the resurrection, according to my cousin Mag. New plays are always tricky for stage management, with sole access to the sets demanded by the crew until the last flat on the revolving stage controls. Sorry, I've missed a bit, until the last flat had been braced. So while the stage crew were being briefed on the revolving stage controls, we'd had to wait to dress the set with props, tack down the carpets, put up pictures, hang curtains, and fill bookcases with books. Which meant that we were running late that Monday, and I was up a ladder wrestling with a set of curtains when we heard the pass door open to the sound of laughter. I don't believe that eyes can bulge, not really, but if they could, I'm sure mine would have done in the moment that Miss Compton swept up from the prop room corridor onto the stage. "Bless you, angel!" The voice came first, bell-like, melodious. Then the entrance in a pungent cloud of scent that smelled of lilies, Persian harems, the Ritz Hotel, and God knows what besides. Well, I hardly need to tell you the advance publicity had been terrific. Weeks earlier, the largest of the dressing rooms had been repainted with a stonking great gold star stuck to the door. And from first thing that morning, Trevor on the stage door had been dashing in and out of it with cards and telegrams and cellophane bouquets of flowers. In cinematic terms, Abigail Compton's was the face that launched 1,000 clips. She must have known that everyone who'd seen it, i.e. everyone, expected it to remain unchanged. And in a way it had, but in another hadn't. Even after all these years, I can still see that entrance. So vivid was the first impression. The once flowing yards of blonde hair had been reduced and styled to sweep back from Miss Compton's forehead in a faux careless wave, with perched behind it like a saddle, a blue velvet crescent of a hat. To describe her figure as disciplined sounds artificial and a little scary. However it was managed, all I can tell you is that there was nothing out of place. The young face of great expectations might have blurred a little around the edges, but not enough to dim its brilliance. All the qualities of the bona fide five-star star were there still, and in spades. The trademark open smile, the flighted brows, the long-lashed bright blue eyes, expressive ballet dancer's hands, and legs like flower stems. After all I'd heard by then about her, I was ready to be impressed, and was immensely. She exuded practiced charm and something, would it sound odd to you if I said gallantry, a kind of brave refusal to let her own legend fade? But how simply marvellous, just as I remember it, Bouse, a darling little house, the great star fluted. We staged the Scottish play here with that frightful ham who did things with his claymore. All actors hate a silence unless it's in the script. And still talking solidly, Miss Compton glanced about the set to spot me on the ladder, staring at her, I imagine, with my mouth ajar. Someone's ghastly dog barked backstage on my damned spot line. Out, damned spot. Out, I say. Woof, woof. It got the laugh, but fuck the sleepwalking scene, my dear, but utterly. She moved into the thin stream of the working light to flash the expensive dentistry at me, perched on the ladder, grinning back at her inanely. Turning up the wattage for an instant, she made her exit cleanly through the wings, stage left, in the direction of the dressing rooms, to leave a technicolored ghost behind her, dancing on the dusty air. I can't help it if it sounds ridiculous, but I very nearly clapped. And it was like that, really.
Fantastic, thank you.
You can see it's been a while since I've been on the stage, so I muffed my lines a bit.
I really, yeah, the words sort of Hollywood, stardom, legend introduce us wonderfully to the book. So to get us started, can you give us sort of a brief introduction to the Three Seasons of Sadie?
Well, as you've heard, it is based a bit on my own experience in repertory. It's, I would say, a comic novel. I think we're going to talk about genres, aren't we, at some point? So I think it's, the genre is comedy, and in brackets, adult, which makes it sound even ruder than it is. It isn't very, I wouldn't say it was very rude, but it is a bit rude. But I think that's quite an uncomfortable genre, isn't it? Because not a lot of comedy books are written. And it's a difficult genre. Surprisingly, it's my lightest book, but not necessarily the easiest one to write. Interestingly, it is based on a story which was my very first attempt at fiction years and years ago, and I was in my 20s, so I could still remember what it was like, that theatre, which was Richmond Theatre in Surrey. So I wrote it as my first expedition into fiction. I'd written a book, a travel book, which never saw the light of day, and I wrote this book, and it got me an agent. It wasn't this book, it was the same sort of plot, but it's been changed over the years. So it was my first attempt. It got me an agent. And some years later, I became a farmer. I wasn't writing, but I was running a dairy farm. And when the money went out of the milk in the dairy farm, I needed to make some money without leaving the farm. And it was at that point that my agent sent me to Heinemann, a very well-known publishing house. And I went to see an editor there and I actually said to her, I've got to sell a fictional book. I need to save the farm. So what will sell? Which was a question which no editor could answer. But she was a very kind lady, and I think she's here. And she talked, is Julia here?
Julia, are you here? Pop a note in the chat if you're here, because we'd love to hear from you.
Maybe we lost her.
I can't see her. So anyway.
Well, I'll talk on if she does pop up.
Yeah.
But we talked about what sells, what sort of fiction sells. If she could have given me the answer, you know, anyone could do it, and obviously everyone doesn't. But I said I had a story. It was based partly on my grandparents. It was an Edwardian First World War story. Would that be the sort of thing? She said, sounds good. Write me 2 chapters and write me a synopsis. And when she said write a synopsis, I thought, I really need to show how the whole book is going to develop. And I had it in my mind already. So I wrote a synopsis of about 40 pages. And actually, she was looking for about 3. So
it kept her busy.
I gave much more than they wanted. She wasn't the commissioning editor. She passed it on to the commissioning editor, who was a very tough nut lady. She's not here, so I can say that. She read the synopsis and she cried at one point. She was meant to. There was a sad bit. And because she cried, everyone else was incredibly impressed because she didn't generally cry. So they bought the book for £2,000, which in those days.
What year
Sorry?
What year was that?
1980, maybe, something like that. And £2,000 was quite a lot of money.
Absolutely, especially in publishing terms.
But the next thing, which was quite terrifying, was the next year. So they said, write the book. The next year, it went into the Heinemann catalogue with a very complimentary review about how good it was. And it was a new book. And I was only 2/3 of the way through writing it. And that terrified me completely. And actually, it was delayed slightly, but not much. But that one, it did very well. It was called Chalkhill Blue. And it saved the farm. It really did. It earned enough money for us to go on farming.
Is that the most successful of the quintet, would you say?
I think it's the book that's been liked best by the most people. Yeah. But this book is actually a sequel. I'm going to...
Is there something buzzing?
It's the dishwasher. I'm going to go and have to turn the dishwasher off. Talk amongst yourselves.
We've never had that before, the dishwasher in the middle of the Zoom. So £2,000 in 1980 was a good deal back then. And I'm sad that the editor's not here, because it would have been really nice to chat to her, as the series has come full circle, I should say, and I'm sure she would have been delighted to see Sadie and how it's developed, because obviously Sadie has changed from what it was submitted into what it is now. You know, we went through quite a process, didn't we, with Sadie?
Yes, well, it was in the past. It was something I had done earlier on, and actually, when I finished Chalkhill Blue, it went well. It went into hardback, it went into paperback, and it's actually been into 8 editions so far, that one. So it did very well. But when I finished it, the publisher, which was Heinemann, was Julia, said, do it again, do another one. And I hadn't actually got as far as thinking another one. So Chalkhill Blue was set in Sussex. It was in the Sussex Downs. So I thought, well, what if I did a prequel and went back to another good period for Sussex, which was smugglers.
Yeah.
And so I wrote the next book, which was actually even harder to write, about Sussex smugglers. And I called, because Chalkhill Blue had been named after a butterfly, I thought, well, I'll do 4 and I'll give them each a butterfly name. So I called the next one Brimstone, and that went all right. So they said, do it again. And then I wrote Painted Lady. And I was going to do a 3rd one, but got very complicated. I was still working elsewhere. The publishers said, actually, you could do something much bigger and make much more money. Do breakout, which is the phrase they use, breakout, do a huge book. And we looked for a subject for that one. And I'd always wanted to do a medieval story. So the subject for that one was the White Cross. But it wasn't, it was sold for a large amount of money. It was auctioned and 2 publishers bid, again on a very long outline. And they were going to pay me £75,000 for that.
Wow.
Which
When is that?
Maybe late 80s,
Wow.
early 90s. And so I started writing what they wanted. But after I'd written about a 3rd of the book, the publisher was taken over by a totally different one, who basically didn't want the book. They didn't want the book, and it was the days of the big advances. That 75,000 was riding on the wave of the big advances. They ended at that point. The publisher didn't want me. They paid me off. I never got the 75,000. I got about a 3rd of it in the end. And I got completely cheesed off with them then, and I went off and did another job. I just thought, I won't tell you what I thought, but it was quite rude. I just thought I'd had enough of publishing, being messed around, doing all this work, and then finding they didn't want it. So I went off then in half for about 20 years. And then I came back, I retired, I left, we sold the farm, or we were about to sell the farm. So I then went back and rewrote that book and came to RedDoor with it. And then having done all of that, I'd written 4 books, they were all set in Sussex. So I thought, well, what about that first little novel set in the theatre? And wouldn't that make quite a good end to the quintet? Because by then I'd got up to the 1920s. So I thought, well, I could take it then from the 40s, which is when I was born, through to the present day, which I've done with this one. So the first book has ended up as the last book in the quintet. But also this has been rather a good time for it, hasn't it? Because everyone's feeling a bit sort of fed up with COVID.
I think comedy and lightheartedness has its place right now where we are in the world, certainly right now. And I think everyone is looking for escapism and something positive and funny to take their mind off things, definitely.
Well, that's my hope. It's very light. There isn't anything very profound said in this book. The only profound thing I think, well, I shouldn't say it's profound. I think it does discuss the problem, and I know we have a couple of actors here. The problem actors have in constantly having to reinvent themselves for different roles, and then have a normal life in between, but even more so if they become stars. And I think stars often create a second persona for themselves because the public sees them in a certain way. This is very true of film stars particularly, and I've talked about my character, who is a big star. People expect certain behaviour from a star, which isn't necessarily the character of the person. So they're not only recreating their characters on a very regular basis, but they're also having to maintain a character that isn't theirs.
Yeah, well, when we were chatting the other day, you were saying about Marilyn Monroe and how she spoke of herself in the third person.
Yes, I mean, she talked of herself, she talked of Marilyn, and I'm going to read another bit which actually she features in. She talked of Marilyn as her, not me, but her. And she wasn't that character. And there was a story of her walking down the street with a friend, incognito with a headscarf on. Nobody recognized her. And she was talking to her friend and she said, "Would you like to see her?" And she said yes. She took off her headscarf, walked in a totally different way, and everyone saw her and rushed up and knew Marilyn was there. But she said it was like switching on a light bulb. She actually created the character and everyone recognized her, but it wasn't her character.
Fascinating. Must be exhausting.
Yeah.
I think I find it exhausting. Tell us about Sussex. It's obviously in your blood. What do you love most about the Sussex link and the quintet?
I think it's the Sussex Downs. And again, I think there's some people here who live in Sussex and will share this. The Sussex Downs, they're not mountains, so they're not awe-inspiring. They're very gentle and in different lights. It's like people wanting to live near the sea. Anyone who lives near the Downs actually likes to have that view permanently. They can look translucent if they're lit up, very pale. They can be very dark in a storm situation. They're also, I mean, this might sound sexist, but rather feminine. They're curved, there are curves and shadows, and I think people identify with them as a sort of body, a character. Also, because they've been grazed by sheep for millennia, they have a very specific turf with wildflowers, a whole ecology of butterflies, one of them, Chalkhill Blue, so I've described that. A certain smell. Chalk hills are a very distinctive landscape feature. And when I was farming in Sussex, I could see them all the time from my window. So while I was writing books, I had the Downs in the background. So I felt strongly about them and I put them into all of the novels, really.
Is it important to write about where you know? How was that different to the other novels in the series? Because obviously the novels cover such a great expanse, don't they? You have your local history, but also you go out, you know, you go far away too.
Well, I suppose this is about research, isn't it? Of course, it's good to write what you know, but you can't know everything. And if you're writing a historical novel, I mean, I have been rather dim in one way, in that I've set all my historical novels in different periods. If I was slightly brighter, I might, like Georgette Heyer, have really researched one period and then written 20 novels on the back of that research. But I didn't do that. I've had to do individual research for each of the novels, each in a different period. So the answer is research, really, isn't it? You can't know everything, but you can find it out. You can go and visit places to a degree, but you can't know everything about it.
Yeah, so tell us about the research, because obviously that is such a huge part of writing those novels. Has the advent of the internet changed the research process? Has it made it easier? Has, you know, how has it changed?
Yes, it's definitely made it easier. When I first started writing historical novels, I belonged to the London Library. And they had, I don't know whether they still have as the British Library, probably not. They had a fantastic service where I could contact them and say, I'm writing a novel which has the Grand Tour in it, and I want to know I want some first-hand accounts of people crossing the Alps in the Grand Tour in the early 19th century, beginning of the 19th century. I believe they tobogganed down the Alps.
Wow.
And I believe they took the coach body off coaches and put it onto toboggans. I'd heard this. So I said, you know, can you send me all books you've got about that? I got 4 books about crossing the Alps in the beginning of the 19th century.
Specific.
Another book, I said, can you give me everything you've got about Regency prostitution? Again, I got about 4 books. So they did this fantastic service. They sent them in the post.
Yeah.
They were often very valuable books. They just bunged them in the post. And you sent them back a few weeks later. So even before the net. Sorry?
A lot of time reading.
Yes, but fascinating.
Yeah, yeah.
And what I've always tried to do is, when you learn something like that, like they took the body off a coach, put it onto a toboggan, and tobogganed their passengers down the Alps on a huge toboggan. That's so interesting. I just thought, I think everyone wants to know about this, so I'll describe it in the book. So I've done that quite a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell me about Eastbourne and the Meads Theatre, because it's obviously very close to your heart. And one of your readers felt that Eastbourne was a character in itself in the book.
Yes, well, I think Eastbourne is quite a strong character. And when talking about places, you know, I've known Eastbourne all my life. My grandparents lived in Eastbourne, so I visited them. And I particularly loved the Meads village. And I've told this story to people in the Meads, that there was a toy shop in the Meads called Vinyls, and I was taken there. My grandfather went there to buy his newspapers, and I was always allowed something. And I can still smell that toy shop. I loved Eastbourne. And then later on, I was sent to school there, which I didn't love quite so much. But Eastbourne is a very interesting town. It was created as a posh resort. The whole ethos of Eastbourne was posh resort. It's not quite so posh now, but it's still quite posh. So it's beautiful. It was designed specifically to be a beautiful late Victorian, early Edwardian resort. So it has great character. And that hasn't been ruined by 2 world wars, a lot of bombing, the railway coming to it. It still is a very attractive town.
And standing strong. Tell us about the characters. Do the characters take on lives of their own, or do you have a really firm idea of what they're going to do?
Well, I should preface all of this with, I have only written 5 novels, so I don't regard myself as a great authority on fiction. There are a lot of people who turn out a book every year or a book every 2 years. I haven't done that, so I should say I'm not the authority. But the way I've done it always is to create the plot. I really need to know how the plot's going to develop. And another thing I've tried to do is to put a surprise, at least one surprise, into every book. There are so many books out there, aren't there? So many books. You go into any bookshop, you're faced with hundreds. There's no point in writing the same thing as everyone else does. I know you're going to talk about genres, and I know that publishers like genres because they feel that readers do too, but I feel that you've got to be original as far as you can and perhaps surprise the reader.
Yeah, you said you do different things, don't you? With the White Cross, you know, you experimented, you know, with font and colour, you know,
Yes.
You've been quite experimental, I would say.
Well, it's quite a hard thing to write a novel, and you, amongst other things, it's got to hold your interest. Yeah. So it's quite interesting to try different forms. And people have said is the novel form is dead. You know, it's not going anywhere. It was developed in the 18th century, end of the 18th century. It's now run its course. I don't think that's true at all. No. I think you can go on making changes, challenging people. Yeah. But in the White Cross, I've done it a little bit in this one,
with the
in a way.
and structuring it as scenes, you know, in a very theatrical way, traditional
Yes.
way. Yeah.
But in the White Cross, I had I thought it would be more interesting having the heroine speaking as it happened. And that's quite a hard thing to write.
Yeah,
She's actually telling it to you as it's happening in the first person, in the present tense. So that was something quite hard to learn to do, but I did that. But I had the hero speaking in the past tense. He was looking back on the events she's describing from a point in the future, and he's looking back on them. He's a rather unsympathetic character, but the fact he's looking back on these events and saying, I got it wrong, I was wrong, look how silly I was, gives him the sympathy. So I had that dynamic of she's talking as it happens, he's looking back at the same event, and sometimes they're intercut. And then there's a point in the book where they change over. I mean, I won't, it is quite complex. And then there's a third voice in the book, which is the narrator, which is me. And at one point in that novel, I break cover and actually talk directly to the reader. I'm not the first person to do that, but it was an interesting dynamic.
Yeah. Did you enjoy that, talking to the reader?
I did enjoy it. I'm not sure how much the readers did. Some did. I think that book was my Marmite. Of the other books, most people liked them. That one, people either liked it very much or disliked it very much.
Yeah. Well, I guess with your genres, you're writing historical fiction, but you're also writing romance, aren't you? And you're sort of crossing genres. And
yes, this is a tricky one, isn't it?
Like their genres, don't they?
Because I think on all my novels, they are in the historical novel genre and the historical romance genre. Yes. And I saw a review just recently of one of, I think, Chalkhill Blue, where the reader actually said, when I came to read it, it was 3/4 historical novel and only 1/4 historical romance. And I thought, well, what does that mean? I think what it means is that readers of historical romance expect it to be an easy read and a lot of love interest. They don't want too much historical detail. They don't want, I mean, you can get then into the discussion of men's books, women's books. Do all men's books have to be violent? Do all women's books have to be romantic? No, of course not. You can have both. But if people are expecting a certain sort of book to be delivered, and historical romance, I think, is a category where they think they know what it is. Yeah. I sort of crossed the lines a few times, I think. You know, Painted Lady was very much a historical romance. It was light. I think it fitted that category. White Cross probably was a historical novel as opposed to historical romance. Does that matter? Publishers think so, booksellers think so, because they can put it on the right shelf.
Sell, isn't it? You know, pitch it. It's an easier pitch, I think.
Yes, but this one isn't historical at all, except it is historical.
Yeah, I think yes.
It's the 60s. I'm just a historical character now because I can remember them.
Yeah. Well, tell us about writing from experience, because obviously, Sam, there are autobiographical elements with the character.
Yes.
So, is it important to write from personal experience, do you think? Is it more authentic?
Well, I think I was saying to you earlier, wasn't I, that every character you create is a bit of you. I mean, you're also basing them, as I talked about Evelyn Leigh, that character was partly based on her. Yeah. But every character you create, you have to draw something out of yourself, whether it's male or female. Yeah. We've all got a bit of each in us, haven't we? Yeah. So I think I sort of liken it to taking cuttings from yourself. If you're the plant, you take a cutting, and this is a bit of me, and I'm putting it in a pot, and look, it's growing in a different way. Yeah. So that it's starting off as a bit of you that you develop. And it's true that the characters, I plot the books quite clearly. So the characters don't do anything major that I haven't plotted for them, but they certainly do a lot of minor things that I haven't plotted for them, because it just seems right for them. And of course, there's the thing about dialogue, trying to make the dialogue real. So you've got to develop the character with the dialogue. And talking about Sam, who's the hero of this one, yes, there's a bit of me in it, but because I was a callow youth as well, don't take everything he does literally. I didn't experience all of that, but yes, he's based on what I remember. And when I first started writing about him, I was still in my 20s. What I remember it was like to be an adolescent. And I think I say in the book, how to fulfill your biological function without being beastly. And I called him yeasty, verging on the beastly, because that's the problem every young man has. Every nice young man has, you know, they have got a biological urge. So, and that also makes a lot of comic situations, which I exploited very much in this. So he is the character I, of course, identify with most.
Was it fun to write that?
Yes, I think it was after a while. I think I worried quite a lot with this book about getting the tone of voice right. And that's true for every book. If you're writing in a historical period, you've got to get the you've got to get the language right. In the White Cross, people were speaking in Old English and French, so I couldn't do that, but I had to find a language that fitted. And in those, if you're writing a historical novel, you can't draw on any modern metaphors, similes, references to a lot of things that haven't happened. So you've got to find your own language. But with this one, I had to find the language of the 1960s, the language of I'm a 77-year-old, I'm trying to write in the skin of a 19-year-old in the 1960s. So I worried a lot about getting that tone of voice right and not being irritating, because, you know, he's using all the 1960s language, but if you overdo it, it can become very irritating. So it's finding that tone of voice. So I think once I'd found that, I enjoyed writing it. But it was, I kept going back and thinking, is this going to irritate people or not?
And also writing comedy. I think writing comedy is really hard. You know, comedy is subjective.
Yes.
Everyone has their idea of what is funny. And I think writing down, you know, comedy that you see performed is different to written.
It's all about timing, isn't it? Timing and tone of voice. But there's the famous story about the old Edwardian actor who was dying, and his grandson. I don't know whether this is true or not. It's told as if it was true. He is dying and his grandson comes to see him, is very sympathetic and says, "Grandpa, is it hard to die?" And the old actor says, "Oh, no, I don't think it's very hard to die, but comedy now, that's very tricky." And that's true, really. You know, any really good actor will tell you it's harder to play comedy than to play straight.
And I think you're making yourself more vulnerable as well, aren't you, with comedy?
Yes.
You know, you're showing a different side that, you know, you do not know how people are going to take it. No,
particularly if you're being a bit rude. And someone said to me actually about this book, don't you think that the old people, this was someone quite young, don't you think the old people are going to be a bit shocked by this book? And I said, well, the old people nowadays were in the swinging 60s as young people. So I think you'll find they don't shock very easily. The days have gone of my granny was born before the end of the 19th century. He was born in 1881 or something. So the change in social mores in that period was huge, but it hasn't been really in this period. We're not shocked, our generation, by any words. We've heard them all before, haven't we? So no, I wasn't quite so worried about shocking people. And indeed, I haven't written a shocking book, I don't think.
No, not at all. It's funny. It's light-hearted.
Well, someone once said to me, why don't you, when I was struggling earlier on, why don't you write like Jackie Collins writes? Write a Jackie Collins book. And I said, well, I can't because I'm not Jackie Collins.
Yeah.
That tone of voice is not mine.
Yeah. Does her thing very well.
And I might have been slightly embarrassed about writing, all those sex scenes.
Yeah.
I've written a lot of sex scenes in all the books, but they've all served a purpose, and quite a few of them I've played for laughs. Not always. Sometimes they're developing a character. Sometimes they're a bit tragic, but they have their function. Not just let's have some sex because that will jolly things along.
Yeah.
They should have a real role to play.
Yeah.
I think.
Like the scene in the ironing in the cupboard with the ironing board.
Yes.
Well,
do I can't remember whether this was based on a real event or not.
What, the ironing board? The cupboard.
Well, not the ironing board, but the cupboard. There was, and if Jenny's listening to this, she will remember Richmond Theatre. Up in the attic, it had a wardrobe, and a wardrobe was a room, and it had a walk-in cupboard. Right. And the cupboard was piled with costumes, forgotten costumes from forgotten plays, I've called them. Yeah. So when he's trying to make love to Cordelia in the cupboard, I'm saying he's not knowing quite whose buttons he's unbuttoning, because and I sort of have someone saying something. I had to put my glasses on.
It says that's what made me laugh on the Jubilee line.
Oh, right. That's my niece Kate, who's up there. And I've asked her to write a review, Kate, please, saying you laughed on the Jubilee line because, and she actually said, it's not a lot of laughs on the Jubilee line at the moment. Yeah. But yes, I can't remember whether I actually did try something in the cupboard or not, or whether it was just something in my mind that I thought would be good. But I remember the wardrobe very clearly and all the buttons. So I'm not sure.
But it works very, very well. And good. With that in mind, could you maybe do another reading for us?
Yes. This second reading is about a character who is based on a real character. When I was at Richmond, I went off on tour with the company up to Yorkshire. So we had theatrical digs, and we had a landlady who's not a million miles away from my Mag character in the book, who liked to have theatricals. She liked theatricals. So her digs were filled with theatrical people, and one of the members of the company that went with us was a middle-aged lady. I was 19, she rather mothered me, and she was extremely vague. So this character is based on her, and this scene is based on many breakfasts we had in the theatrical digs up in Hull. So in the theatrical way I've written the book, this is part of Act 2. This is Act 2, Scene 4, and the scene is the breakfast table in Mag Goodworth's kitchen the following morning, a Wednesday. Primmy Allen buttering her toast. I dreamt of Marilyn last night. I can't imagine why. Marilyn? Munro, I asked her, thinking of the tragic little star who died the previous August. I was in Prince and the Showgirl at Pinewood, playing one of darling Sybil Thorndyke's ladies in waiting, the thin one, dears, which meant I had to diet crazily, just rabbit food for weeks. What was she like? I meant Munro, of course. Marilyn? I'd called her scatterbrained if I thought she had anything to scatter. Grubby little thing when she wasn't coated with Vaseline and lit up like a stadium. If you ask me, dear, that girl's main talent was for facing a 1,000-watt bulb without squinting. She was a bottle blonde, you know. We knew. But she was gorgeous, surely, Mag. Big teeth, dear, tombstones, and all the worst faults of a Gemini. Shambolic, shallow as a puddle, hours late on set. She drove poor Sir Larry round the twist. But you said you dreamt of her, me. Well, yes, I did, and I can tell you, dear, it came as quite a surprise. She knocked on the front door. That door out there, she gestured vaguely with a marmalade spoon. I went to answer it. I hope you don't mind, Miss Goodworth, dear, but you went in the dream, you see. You're welcome, Mrs. Allen. Couldn't matter less, Mag assured her, with a precarious, straight face. How sweet of you. But do call me Primmy, dear. Everybody else does. So there she was, just there outside the door in the old mac she wore in the last scene of the movie, to hide that vulgar little dress they had to sew her into. But I wonder where Tom's got to. Primmy cocked her fluffy head to listen for the stairs. He'll have to get a move on, won't he, if he wants to catch the train? So what happened then? Mag asked. What, dear? What did she do next? Marilyn, I prompted, in your dream. Well, not a lot, dear, really. Just stood there looking daft and lost for words. She always was, you know, unless that dreadful Strasbourg woman from the actor's studio was there to feed her lines. So, Marilyn, I said, I thought that you were just wonderful as Elsie Marina, Mag suggested. No, dear, dead, dear. I said I thought that she was dead. Primmy took a bite of toast and marmalade and chewed it meditatively. And then she did that breathy, giggly little thing that made you always want to hit her hard with something solid, like a brick, dear. No, sugar, I'm not dead, she said. Then who the fuck, dear, was it that they buried in Los Angeles last year? Related Primmy, poker-faced. That's when Mag performed the nose trick with her tea, and it was only after she had mopped the table and sponged the various parts of us she had sprayed that we heard what Marilyn did next in Mrs. Allen's dream. Well, if you must know, dears, I believe she tried to sell me something. You wouldn't put it past her, would you? In the Macintosh, you see. All the salesmen wear them, don't they? So naturally, I shut the door. You shut out Marilyn Monroe? Well, we all knew that she wasn't famous for her brains, of course, but really, dears, she couldn't have thought I'd buy a carpet sweeper from her, Primmy said, with what for her passed as a frown, and hardly on the doorstep. And if you're wondering what's relevant about that scene, I've put it in as an example of the way that Primmy Allen, Suspect 6, tended to act off stage. Obliquely is perhaps the kindest way of putting it.
Lovely, thank you, Richard. If you have questions, please do pop them in the web chat, because we're very swiftly running out of time, and I'd love to, answer any burning questions. We have one from Kate. 50 years in the making. Is this the hardest book you've written? No, definitely not. I think The White Cross was the hardest book I've written. This is a slight comic book, so it's light. So once I'd done the plot, I think it was one of the easier ones in a way. I did come back to it a lot to repolish it because, as I say, the tone of voice is important. So it got polished, I think, more than any of the other books because it spanned more years, really, right from the beginning to now. 50 years, actually. Gosh. Tell us about the Orient Express, because I think this is fascinating.
Well, I'm not sure whether a lady is here who was involved with that. She may or may not be. It's Carol. Yes, while I was writing this, actually, I can show you something. The Orient Express came to Eastbourne. I don't know whether you can see that fairly clearly.
Yeah.
It's not called the Orient Express now, it's called the British Pullman. And it was to raise money. It came to Eastbourne 2 days running. And it ran for 3 hours. They served a 4-course meal and they had an auction each day on the train. And one of the things, I was asked by a friend if I would auction the names of 2 characters in the book for each of the Orient Express auctions. So I said, yes, that would be fine. And the money that they were willing to pay, which was actually quite a lot of money, it surprised me immensely, to name the character, went to St. Wilfrid's Hospice in Eastbourne. So 2 of the characters were named by the 2 winners of this book. Sorry, the 2 winners of the auction to go in this book. So they're Primmy and Tom Allen, who are a married couple. So the lady I've just been talking about, her name was, and I believe she was named after a grandmother of one of the ladies who was called Primrose. And I said, well, I'll call her Primmy. And she said, actually, my grandmother was called Primmy. So
Oh, how lovely.
I don't know what they think of the book, but they've one of them's had a free coffee anyway.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, yeah, it'd be lovely to get their feedback. Tell us, do you think this book would make a good play, given it's sort of a play within a play, if you see what I mean?
Well, I think there's been quite a lot of the play that went wrong has been quite a popular genre, hasn't it? Theatrical genre. So I maybe with the revolving stage and so on, that might work. I don't know.
Who would play the characters? Who would be Abigail?
Well, I think there'll be quite a few actresses who might manage that, don't you think?
Yeah.
I haven't thought specifically, but I think quite a lot of it would have to be hammed up a bit, wouldn't it?
Absolutely, love it.
And I have to say that I've hammed it up a bit with this, haven't I? Because it's not meant to be deadly realistic, and I think some actors might be a bit insulted by the way I'm suggesting they behave. But some of them were real. I mean, to depart a bit, there was an actor, Jenny, who I think might be listening, might remember his name. If you do, Jenny, put it on the chat. There was an old actor who walked through the set quite regularly.
Walk through it?
Well, you know, when a set is set up, the flats often have gaps which you can't see from the front,
right?
Because of the angle. And he often missed the door completely and just walked through the wall. And did it on a regular basis. So, I mean, the character I've put in there is based on a real person who did that on a regular basis.
Yeah.
So, I've forgotten what the question was.
Well, who would play Sam?
Well, I think it would have to be someone very young and callow, wouldn't it? Which means it would have to be an unknown person. I mean, most people who are good actors have been around for a while, so it would have to be an unknown, wouldn't it? I think it'd be quite easy to cast a middle-aged, glamorous actress. There are many of them, and they would like the role, wouldn't they? Because
it's a fun role.
Roles for ladies of that age, even in these days, are not thick on the ground.
Well, I mean, Judi Dench is always talking about it, isn't she? You know, saying how important it is that, you know, those characters come to light and those actresses get those roles, and how important.
I think that, I mean, television, film always, but television has opened up a lot more roles for men and women, hasn't it? Much more subtle roles in close up. I think it's opened a lot of opportunities which weren't there before. But what I didn't say was this is about a bygone era, that we're talking about weekly rep. Nobody does weekly rep now. That meant casting the play, a new play, every single week. New sets, new costumes, a different, in our case, at Richmond, a different set of actors. It wasn't a single repertory of actors. They were often the same ones, but different actors. So they were recast every week, which was quite something and very exhausting.
Yeah, and sort of, I guess there's sort of the heyday of local British theatre.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of actors gained their experience that way because they, you know, it was an enormous amount of roles. I can remember one actress, and perhaps Jenny, if you're listening, you might remember her too. I think she was called June Shaw, and we had 3 rows running. She was appearing in a play every night. She was in the afternoons rehearsing another play, which was going to be on the next week, and then in the evenings learning a third play. Well, not in the evenings, she was on stage. So she was having 3 plays on the go. And I can remember she passed out completely one day, just fainted because it was just too much.
I don't know how anyone could learn that many lines, you know, in one go.
Act in one play, rehearse another in the same days, and learn a third in whatever time. So it's no wonder she passed out.
Oh, I know.
And I can remember that she fell on this stage with and I've sort of reproduced it in a way in the book, not for her, but for me. She fell with a huge thud And I just thought, well, you know, when you see people acting and they fall gracefully into a heap,
Yeah.
into a gentle heap, that
Yeah.
doesn't happen.
Yes.
It's bang.
Dead weight.
Yes.
So Terry says Hugh Grant as he was in Four Weddings. I think that's a very, I could see him trying to get those Levi's
Yes.
on the bath.
You mean the young Hugh Grant?
Yeah,
He's quite a he's quite a venerable age now, but although he's done some very good camp things, hasn't he, recently?
Now, isn't he?
Yes, but the Paddington 2, he was very, very funny, wasn't he, as a camp actor? Yes, that sort of person, I think. And he was fairly unknown, wasn't he, at the beginning when he was cast for Four Weddings? So yes. Yes, we used to have an actor called Ian Carmichael who appeared in a lot of British films, and he always played sort of clueless types, getting into embarrassing situations.
You need someone with very long, skinny legs.
Yes, I think he was fairly long.
Jeans.
Yes.
Well, I just looked at the time and realised it's gone 8 o'clock.
Right.
So we should really wrap up, but
I should thank everyone who's made the effort to tune in. Thank you very much. And I hope you're not too hungry now. I hope I haven't talked too much nonsense. No,
it's been absolutely fascinating. I feel like I've walked into the world of theatre and Amdram and
well, it's been a nostalgic trip for me as well, because that was an important part of my life, really. And it's been nice to relive it, really.
Yeah, and so much fun. I can't recommend it more. It's just so funny, and I really do hope you all enjoy it. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Richard, for such a fun evening. Do go out and buy a copy of the book, leave a review. I really hope you enjoy it. And take care, stay safe, and good night.
Thanks very much. Bye, everyone. Thanks.